All right, we're going live. Hello, everyone. This is so exciting. This is my favorite day of Negroni Week this week. It is what I'm calling Wine Day. We're starting with Vermouth. We're going to talk about bubbles later. But today we have two very special guests, which I am very happy that they get to meet digitally, but also have a conversation because they're two really amazing people. As individuals and also what they do with their careers and with their lives. So I'm going to do a quick introduction just so everybody is aware of who everyone is. My name is Daniel Warrilow. I work for Campari America. I'm the Italian portfolio ambassador. One of the categories that I work on is called Vermouth. We have an amazing vermouth called Cinzano. The Cinzano family has been making, or I'm sorry, the Cinzano family has been credited for making vermouth since the mid 1700s. We acquired the brand, obviously, but we still keep all of the traditions and all of the important facts about vermouth intact as much as we possibly can. And so we are very lucky to have partners like Roberto, who I'll mention in a bit, to help keep us in line, if you will. But today I'm going to start with Claire Sprouse. Claire Sprouse is based in Brooklyn, New York. She has a wonderful, wonderful bar called Hunky Dory. She is also one of my favorite people because she genuinely gives so much of her time and herself to the industry, to the education of our industry as far as how to create greener practices, sustainability in our industry. In 2020, she started a company called Outlook Good, which I'm sure she'll speak about. But there are so many other things that she's done. So, Claire, thank you so much for joining us, and I'm really excited to share the screen with you and also have you speak a little bit about what you do and who you are.
Hi,
And
hi
then,
everyone.
and then, last but not least, our friend Roberto Bava. Roberto is an amazing individual. I've had the pleasure of spending some time in bars with him, also spending some time in Piemonte with him at his facilities there. Also having a lovely lunch. Thank you for that, by the way. That was beautiful. And Roberto is the kind of individual that wears many hats, if you will. Um, First and foremost, I just want to mention that he is the president of the consortium for Vermouth de Torino. This is a really, really important thing that we're going to talk about, not only for Vermouth de Torino, but Vermouth as a category. He is also deeply entrenched in the winemaking industry. His family has been making wine for over 400 years. So he is the export director for Bava Winery. They make still wines and sparkling wines, especially, also aromatized wines, some vermouth as well. He is the CEO of Giulio Cocchi Vermouth. So I'm sure we can speak about vermouth in depth on many levels here, not just production, but also cocktails. So I'm really excited to get into that. So both, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm really excited to have this conversation.
So,
We've got a couple slides here. We'll just start with some introductory slides. Claire, I'm going to let you go first. And if you wouldn't mind just sharing some of your background, obviously I gave a little bit of info, but some of your passions, what you do, what drives you, all that.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. So I've been in the bar industry for a little over 10 years. Like as Daniel mentioned, I own a bar and restaurant, but my background has always been focused in beverage and a lot of operations, and whether I'm consulting or teaching or doing whatever it is that I somehow cram into my calendar. I'm always like most at home back behind the bar. And one of the greatest like places of security and relief that I found as a person that opened their own place in the last year, and going through that stressful time, and even now during the pandemic, is being able to jump back behind the bar, and where I find like the most calm and get to release all my creative efforts out. And I love doing cocktails. When I was consulting, I was doing cocktails in everything from Italian restaurants to New Orleans themed places, Japanese programs. And now at Hunky, where we, as Daniel mentioned, focus on sustainability, but I think the ongoing thread between all those places is that I love the idea of cocktails and food and drinking and eating going hand in hand. And for myself, that has made me focus a lot on fortified wines and especially vermouth when I create cocktails.
It's funny because there's just so much that you can talk about, and I know that because I genuinely, I mean, you know that we are obviously good friends, but I respect you so much because of all of the time and effort that you do spend, not just creating programs that are mindful of these things, but also the education and the time that you take to educate people on sustainability and how we can all do better in this industry is really, really important. Obviously, you know, loving fortified wine, many of us in this industry do, but also your creation of cocktails is something that I really, really love because not only are you merging all those things together, but you're making genuinely amazing creations. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, because my focus is in sustainability, I think a lot of people will think that that means that there's a sacrifice in time or in resources or efforts towards like achieving like certain flavors or certain quality of products because they believe like sustainability in some ways kind of undermined or not undermine in a negative way, but it takes the priority off of other things. And it's true, like we do really try to balance that intersection of all the things that we love about cocktails, but all the things that I believe can make cocktails even better for our communities. So it's a lot. And so much of that too is, you know, I have a small bar and restaurant here in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, and we're not a place that is focused on tourism or we're not dependent on tourism. And so we deal with a lot of our neighbors and a lot of regulars and we try to make sure that while we kind of balance like all these geeky things we love about cocktails in terms of flavors, in terms of spirits and bottles and techniques, we want to make sure that they are connecting with the general with the neighborhood in a really authentic way. And so kind of every time we are like, okay, we're going to use mango brandy and Pinot de Charente in a cocktail and thinking about how that like reaches our audience, you know, that might mean that we have to find a way to make sure that it's still really approachable, not dumbed down by any means, but definitely, you know, something that people will look at and immediately feel will gravitate to because it sounds delicious or they're curious. So for us particularly, the kind of esoteric classic cocktail approach has not been our focus necessarily. We've tried to kind of flip those ideas on their head to make things again food friendly and just approachable.
Yeah, and I think it's funny that you bring up, you know, like Pinot de Charente and mango brandy. I mean, first of all, yes, I'll take both of them. That's fine. You can put that in a cocktail and drink. I would love that. But it's also, I think that there's an opportunity in this section of the spirits world, if you will, to educate. And I think one of the reasons that I'm very passionate about it is because not only is it an amazing category that is a bit misunderstood, it's also something that has had very little education around it to the consumer. So in order to do that, it has to be in many forms, not just, you know, on a liquor store shelf. It has to happen in bars and restaurants. And it has to be people like yourself who are creating cocktails, presenting the cocktails, and educating people while doing that. And in order for us to move this section of the category further, not just in the efforts like what is Roberto doing, but in order to educate people, consumers, the people that know very little about this, we need your section of the industry to continue doing that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And you know, it's not just about including these flavors or products and cocktails just because we love them. It's not just for, I think, an ego-driven pursuit. It's because we genuinely love sharing these like unique products and these unique stories and the agricultural terroir and also the cultural terroir of where they're coming from. And I do sometimes joke that we're like tricking people into drinking that. So like right now we have this cocktail on our menu that is just wildly popular. It's, we're coming towards the end of summer, but we've been just pushing through all these watermelon cocktails. And the main ingredient in it is dry vermouth. And then there's like a splash of Pinot de Charente and then like Spanish brandy. And people just order them over and over and over again. And then they're like too deep and they're like, what am I drinking? So the conversation kind of, it's like we've almost taken like these like ingredients that people immediately gravitate to and kind of turned the conversation upon that initial order from, oh, what do you have with tequila? What do you have with this? Because that's what I'm used to drinking. And they are like, watermelon, I'll take one of those. And then all of a sudden we're kind of opening the conversation to these other categories of spirits and these other categories of wines that now they're like genuinely curious because they've had one or two, three at the most.
I mean, safely, of course. Over time, one per hour. I don't know exactly legally how it works, but yeah. All right, cool. Well, thank you for that insight, and I'm glad you mentioned the cultural aspects of the terroir aspects. So I'm going to switch it over to Roberto. Roberto, thank you for joining us. I could start by saying, why did you come to love vermouth, or why did you come to love this category? But it's almost like you were born into it. And so that's just like a small portion of what you do, obviously. And what I listed also, by the way, is a small portion of what Roberto does in his life. He also is helping to further the chocolate category. There's many things that we could talk about with this man, but most importantly, let's talk about vermouth, if you don't mind.
Ciao a tutti. Yeah, it's a long story. Lot of sedimentation in my life. I started with a degree in business administration at Torino University, but I was already in the winery. So my family is Bava, is really long established. We are farmer in a way. We have vineyards in Warrilow, Asti, etc. So we've been there for forever, and this is part of our way of thinking. And so I always need to remember that I am a grape producer. I produce fruit, even if it's very sophisticated, because Barolo takes you around the world in very noble circles. But at the very end, I am a fruit producer. Yeah, we were involved with Vermouth when my family entered the Giulio Cocchi story and winery in Asti. This was 40 years ago, actually. And the idea was to produce the best sparkling wine in the world, because Cocchi is also a name for sparkling wine. And then we found to be sitting in the cellar plenty of Barolo Chinato and Americano, which are the two original recipe of Mr. Cocchi 130 years ago. So that's the family business story. Well, the link is that everything we do and I do is tireless and with 100% passion. So it's not true that I know everything, but the few things I know, I spend a lot of time. So I surprise you, of course, with the chocolate. I was the president of the Chocolate Society of Italy. So if you want to be a chocolate eater, you need to be the president. You need to be the max. And yeah, if I have to be an expert, I'm an expert in the sacramental wines, which is also a very niche. And we used to produce a wine called Alleluia for the Vatican. And of course, Vermouth is a recent story, because I when I entered the company, we stopped, we discontinued the production of Vermouth because it was not the decade, no more the fun product it was in the 80s and the 90s. But when we came back with that label, it was time to start again, and this is why I've been. I found this, I can say, the friendship of all the producer, and we started together to rebuild the old appellation, the old denomination. So this is why actually tonight my hat is the one of president of the Consorzio di Tutela del Vermouth di Torino. Long name, which is the entity that has the official role by the government and by the producer to protect the identity, the denomination, and quality of anything with Vermouth di Torino on the label. You want a parallel? Parmigiano Reggiano, I always like to do it. I mean, similar situation, there's a consorzio, they have to rule the law, control the quality, etc. So Vermouth di Torino is pretty new because we got to the final, let's say, appointment by the law, in the European law, actually early this year. After several years of working on regulation and etc. But we are a young baby with 300 years old, if you want the way. And it's exciting because we have a long story back, but we have such a future ahead. So this is why I found a way to spend some of my passion for the industry. Actually, I'm volunteer, nobody pay me, unfortunately, but I really want with my colleague producer to bring Vermouth to the next generation, to the next century, etc., etc. It deserves it. And of course, we talk about Negroni, so Negroni need it. And this is what we are doing tonight. I mean, we want to better our listener life, do we?
Yeah, I think one of my favorite things about what you do is that you find the thing that needs attention and you give it all of your attention, obviously, but more importantly, you bring people together, which I really love. You said, I think there's about 20 producers that that now belong to the consortio. So it's, and obviously we are one of them, you're one of them, and there are other brands out there, but I think it's important to note that in order for this effort to really take hold, we all need to do it together and we need to work together. Whether the companies are large or they are small, the point is quality and the point is getting consumers to understand exactly what the product is.
Yeah, I totally agree. This is a part of the talk that never come out, but it was surprising to see how we sit around the table and what you believe we are enemies. Actually, we all work together in a genuine way to protect the appellation di Torino. In a way, I found around that table, which the big guys where you belong also, of course, but we have the Carpano, the Martini. I mean, I have 20 to mention, maybe I should do them all, mention them all, but we find a kind of common talk, and until today is genuine, unexpected. I would say that for so many years, the industry tried to put together all the producer, and it failed for decades. And probably this was the right time to do it. We also have the instrument now to protect quality and the consumer, because the recent laws, even the EEC, I mean, it's all is, the orientation is for identity, is for, if you want, sustainable. That's a clear way also we are going to. And protection of the consumer. So this is what put us in common. And again, the producer of Vermouth at the Consorzio di Torino are representing probably the 90% of the world production of Vermouth, because people like Bacardi, Branca, Cinzano, what else, they also produce large volume of non di Torino sometime, and this is Vermouth in any way. So I think we really are an interesting case history, I would say.
Okay, and so you just kind of mentioned it. There's a lot of companies producing vermouth, not just Vermouth di Torino. I think maybe it might be good to start with the basic information for people and education on what vermouth is. So if you wouldn't mind just giving people a rundown of, in your opinion, if you were to say vermouth, what does that mean to you?
I would surprise probably someone saying that 10 years ago, the shock of the people was that vermouth is 75% wine. So wine is important. The link with wine is what, in a way, takes it out from the spirit industry, but also the world of botanical takes it out from the wine industry. So I like to say that we are the bridge between a cocktail menu and the wine list. We are a link, we are a bridge. And because of this, we have to fulfill the expectation, but also the rule of both the world. Alcohol is quite under rules in Italy, and not only. Wine, not to mention wine, there's a lot of rules about wine. So naturally, it's probably one of the most controlled product, probably. So yes, it's wine-based. It's an aromatized wine. If you can believe that it is an aperitif, but for someone can be a digestive, you may expect it to be more or less botanical, botanics in the flavor and the character, but one of the important ingredient is history, because history is what brought Vermouth to what is today. Recipe are essential, absolutely important to make the style of the maison, but also the character of the product, etc. Botanical are important. This is why in the Vermouth di Torino rules, you using Artemisia wormwood, whether Absinthium or Pontica, the two, they need to be grown in Piemonte. And you may say, okay, why Artemisia can be grown anywhere else? Yeah, but how about, do you know that mint has not the same flavor if you grow it in the Alps or in Sicily? Do you know that even Chardonnay doesn't take the same flavor if it is in California, Australia, or France? So start to think about that even botanical can have that kind of characteristics. So we discover, and probably history discovered, that the Artemisia grown in Piemonte it's higher in quality. So this is one of the aspects that the law asks, basic. The other ingredient is more virtual and is what we call savoir-faire or know-how, which means probably not every child in Italy, in Piemonte, knows how to make vermouth. But it's true that having been producing vermouth for 300 years, it's part of our DNA, part of our skills. And this is why if you can trust in a Vermouth di Torino made in Piemonte more than Vermouth di Torino made in Alaska, probably. Nothing against Alaska, by the way. But,
I'll be honest with you, I have not had a vermouth from Alaska yet, but if you have, tell me about it.
Not yet. It will come. So the rules are not only the control, but are also like, let's say, minimum alcohol. There was a big fight because minimum alcohol changed also the taxation. In some market, if you are lower in alcohol, you pay less. If you are high in alcohol, you pay more, etc. So we could go to a point, and in spite of the interest of the industry was to be around 14.5, we were able to bring the minimum alcohol to 16. And you know why? Because we have been asking bartender, what do you think should be the alcohol in a vermouth? What do you believe its quality in terms of alcohol in a vermouth? And it came out that this was a reasonable understanding of quality and alcohol in vermouth. Actually, if we go back to the Regio Decreto, the King Law, the last one in 1935, until we had a king, the alcohol was 15.5. So it was already in the tradition that a vermouth should be at least 15.5. Of course, we also wanted to make a pyramid. So we want also vermouth to have the opportunity to be superiore. So what wanted to be a riserva, but our government asked it to call it superiore to link it to wine, because superiore is a typical definition for wine. Riserva is more sometimes for spirit. So the government wanted to link vermouth a little more to wine. So the superiore is what you would call riserva maybe in a bourbon. So we get, you need to have at least one more point of alcohol, so 17. And here you need to be more specific in wine. You need to be more Piemonte. At least 50% of wine should be from Piemonte, not only from Italy. And in terms of botanical, we need to have at least 3 botanical from Piemonte. So again, you go more and more specific in identity. Again, it's a direction, and the direction is in the right direction for quality. Yeah, categories. We rule the sugar, actually, more than the color. So the sugar is the classic extra dry, dry, and sweet. But of course, if you talk about style of vermouth, you can go by color. So you have bianco, rosso, rosé, ambrato, etc. You can also go by history. So there are some old recipe like vermouth al Barolo, like vermouth alla vaniglia. If we mention one of the most famous Carpano Antica was vermouth alla vaniglia. So this is an old category. Even the cookies was sweet vermouth, so it doesn't enter in this category. But again, what will be the categories? Is it Torino or not? Torino has also a characteristic which I always joke saying, what should be the taste of Torino? Claire, have you any answer? It's very easy.
Oh, she's on mute. Hold on. There we go.
What should be the taste?
Well, it's easy. Well, I guess I think of Torino as being, you're like shaking your head no already.
No. It's more stupid than what you think. Vermouth di Torino should taste of a vermouth. Think about.
Okay. That's maybe like notes of like sun-kissed raisins.
It means that it shouldn't taste of pineapple because it's not traditional. It shouldn't taste of banana because it's not in the tradition. And in a way, you as a very sustainable vermouth girl, actually you want to trust in a vermouth the taste of vermouth. You want to add banana or one of your phenomenal flavor I've been seeing in your wheel, you will add it. So we don't pretend to add funny flavor. We want it to be consistent. Vermouth di Torino is something you can trust in it. This is the taste. No funky, I'm sorry, but you are allowed to be funky as a bartender, as a bar lady. So that's the way it works. We give you safety on taste. It's under the law. The wine is good. It needs to be good. The botanical are from Piemonte, not every botanical. And if you do a Negroni, you can be sure that with the Vermouth di Torino, it's the one. Actually, Vermouth di Torino was probably the one when in Florence, they invented it 100 years ago, and potentially it was either Cinzano or Martini Rossi or Cora, one of the 3 or 4 at that time.
Well, it's funny you bring that up because I've been doing some digging into our archives for Campari, and at one point in time, Gaspare Campari made Vermouth di Torino under the Campari label, and this was in the late 1800s. And then when Davide took over for him, he kind of narrowed down the list of items that they made, but it was up until I think it was 1905 that they were making Vermouth di Torino under the Campari label. So it's funny because at one point, everybody was making some style of vermouth or something, but Vermouth di Torino has had a name for quite some time, not just there, but also in other areas where people would produce it and sell it in other places, which is interesting. I do want to mention one thing. Claire actually the other day was talking about how many styles of vermouth she has at the bar. So how many brands or styles of vermouth would you say that you carry right now?
Today we probably have about 5 different sweet vermouths and maybe about 6 different dries. Maybe 1 blanc, and we have a rosé. We like vermouth.
Yeah. Well, and I bring it up to say, that, and as Roberto mentioned, what should a Vermouth di Torino taste like? It should taste like vermouth. We when we launched 1757 in America, at the Academy, we did a blind tasting of vermouth in every category, and we put the most popular dry vermouth, the most popular sweet vermouth, and we tasted them blind. And it was interesting to see the notes that came out of each of them, and to later reveal which ones they were, because I think at some point in time we are trained, especially as bartenders, to just go with this one vermouth because this is what we've been told is what we should use. And we have a preconceived notion in our mind what this thing will taste like. And when you taste it side by side with other styles in the same category, you will be shocked to know that this is not the vermouth that you thought it was, and that these are not the notes that come out of this X, Y, or Z vermouth that you thought it was. So as Roberto mentioned, it is really important to kind of dissect that and have your own perspective, but also to have the options available so that you can create with different styles of vermouth, I think personally. And then Roberto, as far as other styles of vermouth, because I know that we talked about Vermouth di Torino, obviously you mentioned some other styles, but Warrilow Chinato, if we were to talk about Americano or other styles of fortified wines, do you feel that they are just not as popular, and so maybe not as much focus should go to them, or that they are so specific that really it's just not something that you spend as much time on?
No, let me add one point to what you were saying, because it's very interesting, and it's my attitude in the business. I mean, I see myself and our winery to be a supplier of flavors. And as a president of the institute and the consortium, the Vermouth, I think that we are now supplier of a Pantone range. So I give you like a 40, 50 label coming, and all of this is a flavor. So there's not the best one or the worst one, if they are quality, of course, but we give you flavors. So the point is, people like Claire has a privilege to have all of this color. So she has, like, I didn't count them all, like 11, 10 vermouth in house. So she may use one for Negroni because it fits to her taste, to her customer, but also fits better to the Negroni. But something else may fit better to the Martini, to the Manhattan, etc. So I normally suggest that in a range of potential vermouth, at least more than one brand always. It doesn't exist anymore that you have one brand in the back, and it's boring. This was in the 80s, it was in the 90s. People, bartender coming from the cruise, they had only 8 bottles, and there was a combination of 8 bottles. I mean, it's more.
I like to think that your perspective on American bars are cruise ships, and that's my favorite part of this whole thing.
You know, I tell you why. Because I am in Torino, I am in Asti, and for us, cocktails were coming from the cruise, and Genoa was the place where all the bartenders were because they were learning from going from the cruise. So it's quite a clear image of it. Of course, now it's totally another story. But also that
Do you
Piemonte,
think that
Italy.
Claire's bar is a cruise ship? Is what I want to know. It's like a stable cruise ship that floats around Brooklyn. Sorry. Anyway, continue.
8 bottles, 1 gin, 1 tequila, 1 vermouth. No, now it's more. And actually, Italy also used not to do such a. It didn't have the mix appeal. I mean, we used to drink neat. So Amaro was neat, vermouth was neat, etc. You and the English people has been teaching us this with the only exception of the futurist futurist recipe which we had between 1910 and 1920. That was a revolution, but this was the only revolution. After that, we are Anglophone when we talk about cocktail.
It's funny you say that because
I don't remember the question.
It's okay. I think it's funny because I do a fair amount of education on history, specifically on cocktail history in Europe, and I think it's interesting to put a parallel of the time frame, especially the early 1900s, because a lot of Americans forget that we didn't have bars for 30 years, and so it's one of those things where it's like when you look at it. 13 years, sorry. I'm trying to do the math of 1920 to 1933, and apparently I said 30. But that's why I don't do math. But it's interesting because all of the bartenders that we had went to Europe. And so all of the education that we were doing with cocktails went to Europe. And it wasn't until that time that the European cocktail culture actually started. And especially in Italy, when we talk about cocktails from the late 1800s and early 1900s, there were no such thing as cocktails. And when we do education on Campari, people were drinking Campari in a little glass on its own until Davide started making Campari and soda. And that came from the Bianco Sprezza, like a white wine spritzer. So the general idea of it. So it's interesting to think that the Italian cocktails that we think of today are these like mind-blowing things, but actually it's almost a creation that we came together with over that time period, which is fun to think about.
But also, if you think about the cocktail par excellence in Italy, is the Negroni in any way. And it was like a combination of 2 ingredients first and then the third one when Camillo came and added his spirit, the gin. So still it was very simple. It was unsophisticated, but again, like everything, including Italian cuisine, everything is about ingredients. So if you put together 2 of the magic ingredients, you get another magic thing. The best Italian food is a pasta with some Parmigiano, but Parmigiano need to be real and pasta need to be real. Only the 2 of it is magic. So ingredients is our philosophy. This is why we didn't need to put so many ingredients because the basic one are good enough. 3 ingredients and you do the famous cocktail in the world. Wow.
Well, okay. So something I want to talk about because I think it's really important to share this aspect. The idea that vermouth as wine and that it needs to be taken care of a certain way. And maybe perhaps in America, we did not treat it very well for many decades. Obviously, if you remember going to a bar where there was a bottle on the back bar and it had a pour spout and it was half empty and it was probably there for at least 5 years, there's a point where we have to start re-educating people. But I don't think that's just an American problem, because I visited a bar in Florence. And I'm not going to say which one, I'm not going to say anything else, except that there were 15 vermouth and it had its own back bar and they were all open and they were all half empty. And I'm like, we are in the city of Negroni. We are literally at the place where it was made. This is crazy to me.
Maybe that was just that day's
yeah, they just put it out for the day, and then it was a lot of vermouth, and it had its own back bar.
If you recall what I told you, that we used to consider vermouth like almost like a liqueur, you are part of the answer. But also what we are going to say about how to keep it, etc., is something very new for us too. I always tell a little joke about Italian and vermouth. I mean, in a family, vermouth was kept in the family bar for the American cousin coming. And of course, until the following year, the same bottle was opened in the bar, was even not a fridge, of course. So the cousin are coming again, the same bottle, which was almost Marsala the year after. This was the way. So we got even the feeling that vermouth was oxidized naturally, but it is not. I learned this from United States. I mean, our importer Eric Seed is a kind of genius in this, and he wants us to put the space to in the back label to write when the bottle has been opened. And he used to recommend 1 month, and now it's only more 3 weeks. I hope he will stop in this reducing the.
Because I've seen this not only in vermouth. I've also seen it in wine-based Amari, wine-based bitter, and you'll see that it's. And this is one of my biggest pet peeves, which I try not to stand on the soapbox because I don't want to be annoying. But you have wine-based anything, and you'll see them on the back bar, and you're like, either you don't know that it's wine-based or you don't care that it's wine-based. And then I've also seen importers when they have those fact sheets or the sell sheets, and it'll say, this will spoil in, 0 to 1 month. And then I've even seen some people put on their fact sheets, unopened, this will only last up to, and then there's a certain amount of time. So I think it's becoming more and more specific, and maybe the American market is the leader in that. But I think these are conversations that should happen, and whether or not we agree upon it, it's definitely a conversation to have.
Another concept is that you keep this bottle in a fridge. Okay, I think it can keep, let's say, a month. But the real point is, if you keep a bottle in the fridge for a month, either you are sick or you have not enough friends. Because come on, a bottle, you drink it. Why should you keep it in a month? For a month?
I think that at least in the bar, I talk about having all these different vermouths and things like that, but we don't want to, as you're saying, we don't want to open a bottle and let it just sit there as well. And so that's why one of the reasons why our menu is so heavy on fortified wines and things like that is that we want to make sure that we're actually pushing through them and not letting them go bad even in the fridge. So it's, that is also part of a thing to take into consideration when you're planning your menus, that you're actually using the products at hand.
And just real quick, I want to make a comment about the time frame. So I think people tend to think, okay, well, I have until this date to use it, and as long as I use it by this date, it'll be fine. But the point is that actually it's changing daily, obviously. So maybe it's changing slower if it's in the fridge, but it is changing daily. So even if you get to a month, it's not all of a sudden, oh, we're at a month, we have to throw it out now. It's like you should actually be using it as soon as you can, because it does change every day. Sorry, just want to make that note.
I have an idea. Don't waste it.
I thought you were going to say drink it as quickly as possible.
That's one part of it.
I'm sure, Claire, you have a lot of friends and you have a good rotation. But in case you have a bottle who is still there for a while, let's say 3 weeks in the fridge, okay, let's do something in your kitchen because the wine is still good, is less floral, less botanical, etc., but still it's a good product. So you may use to, I don't know, to wet gambas, how to say in English, mm, uh, shrimps. Put it
Okay.
on your barbecue. That's an idea. I mean, use it to bring botanical to things. You can even do a risotto if you have a white, a dry. You can splash with some sparkling one and a glass of dry. Uh, you find a way to use it. It's not horrible. It's not the bottle of your cousin from America. It's still drinkable. So again, I think we haven't explored yet the great scenario we have ahead for Vermouth, and I'm sure we'll be surprised to see the use of it. I've been pairing and discovering and using Vermouth as an ingredient. The new story is that I invented a panettone al Vermouth. You may not be aware of what is a panettone.
That was very good, by the way. Thank you. I had that last year for the holiday. Yeah, it was very good.
Use Vermouth like a wine sometime, like an ingredient in the kitchen, etc., etc. That's my idea. You don't waste it.
So now that we're talking about vermouth ingredients, let's talk about cocktails. Claire has provided a couple different cocktail recipes that we have some slides for. And so let's go through them just because obviously it is Negroni week. We're talking about vermouth, we're talking about Negronis. Will you give us a little bit of insight into these cocktails and maybe how you came up with them, if possible?
Yes. So, you know, I think everybody, especially this week, we all want to honor the Negroni, the traditional Negroni, but we all want to put our wacky spin on them. And so, you know, we came up with this cocktail. It was actually originally made with, I completely forgot this. This was actually originally made with mango vodka. You know, bringing it into the bar, we really wanted, we had this amazing, my bar at least, we had this amazing mango brandy that we wanted to use that was really aromatic, and thinking about how we could have like a stirred cocktail that was, especially right now since we're relying on patio seating so much, that was kind of evocative of summertime as well. And so we, this is just a really simple riff that kind of really changed the aroma and texture too of the Negroni that we all know and love. And so it's just a really simple switch on the main ingredient, or not the main ingredient, one of the three main ingredients. And then we kind of added more of our like sustainable point of view by using a technique where we made mango leather by just blending, laying out pureed mango and dehydrating it as a way to preserve mango year round even, which is what that little slice on top that looks like American cheese. It's not cheese, it's mango leather. And for this cocktail, you know, we ended up using a, you know, like I said, we wanted to keep it a little bit more summery. And so we ended up using a lighter style sweet vermouth. And, you know, we touched upon like how all vermouth are different and how some work better in certain cocktails. But I think that also is true for like different spirits as well. So one of my favorite, you know, experiences at a bar is when people order off the menu and they want a Negroni or a Manhattan, and they call for a specific gin or a specific whiskey, and you know, getting to base my vermouth choice around that instead of just going for a singular bottle, I think is really important. And you know, as you mentioned, tasting through all of the vermouth at once to kind of see where they all stack up against each other. Try also doing that in like a martini or a Negroni or a Manhattan, and you eat with the same Campari and gin across the board, and it would be a completely different cocktail each time. Well, not completely, but it's like enough to notice the difference and to kind of dial in what your preference is for that. But this is the Mangoni ! And it's been our very big summertime hit this summer.
Awesome.
Yeah, and then the second cocktail, what did we decide on? The Outlook Good. So this is like another really great example, kind of doubling down on what I was just talking about. So again, using our viewpoint of sustainability, we're always making sure that if we have a drink with celery juice on the menu, we're saving the celery leaves. If we have herbs that might be about to turn, we can use those and put them in a syrup. If we have things like sage stems or mint stems, which are equally as aromatic as the leaves themselves, we'll throw those into a syrup and or into the dehydrator, and then they later go on in the syrup. So we're always thinking about food waste as much as vermouth waste. And so this is a cocktail where you can kind of take any of those things that you might have at home or in your bar, make a syrup, and then that I think really will determine what type of vermouth you're using. So I deliberately didn't specify the brand on here because, you know, if I'm doing something with celery, I might not want a vermouth that has like certain notes of rosemary, for instance, because for me those two flavors don't really sing together. And so it's just another nice example of how the other ingredients in the cocktail really have to sync up well with the vermouth that you're using, because they each, while the singular flavor is vermouth, is wormwood, is the fact that they do have different botanicals and that are indicative of where they're from and who's making it as well.
I love that. And then can we go to the next slide? Because I think this one is really important. I think Roberto talked about it briefly, but these are just some combinations of flavors that work with each other. And I think it's an interesting perspective. We had a conversation last night, and it was about which cocktail books or non-cocktail books to use when talking about making cocktails or pairing flavors. And obviously something like the Food Bible or the Vegetarian Food Bible, like these are great ways of understanding what flavors work together. And especially if we're talking about vermouth, it's especially important to understand the botanicals that each of them contain, or at least are the most apparent when you're making drinks. So Claire, is there a way that you go through this process? Is it like, do you just make the same drink but with different vermouth, or is it a tasting ahead of time or something like that?
Well, I don't, you know, as we mentioned, vermouth does go bad and it changes. And so I don't have the luxury to have, you know, all the vermouth that is available in the New York market at my disposal all the time. So I do have to rely on my tasting notes. And so this is something that I did from the time I started bartending, but I have like journals and documents now, Google Docs of all my tasting notes for, you know, everything from mezcals to vermouth. And so it's a good reference guide. And I just like to, you know, jot down obviously all the things that you would do when you're tasting so that I can quickly reference them. And I had, you know, so when I'm working with something like in the peak of summer, like cherries, and I know that, okay, cherries, on that last slide, I can say that cherries go well with X, Y, and Z flavors. And then I can cross-reference that with my vermouth notes and know which ones that to go to when I'm thinking about making a cocktail. And I mean, for me, that's like the most efficient in terms of time and cost, and also it's just incredibly good practice for tasting and understanding flavors and balancing them. We were, you know, especially when I was leading up to my Bar 5 day several years ago, and like just blind tasting. Like this is a great exercise that kind of feeds into that, because that's where you really learn like about flavors and it's a practice that wine people have been doing forever, right? That I think has been not as emphasized in spirits. And that's something that has been indispensable when I make my cocktail menus.
Okay, and then this is interesting to me because there's also the aspect that obviously wine, vermouth, botanicals, all of these things are natural products. These are, and if we're talking about terroir, if we're talking about where things come from, we should also make mention that maybe these things change slightly over time, and maybe every year the botanicals that we're getting, the wine that we're getting, are going to have different aromas and different things. So maybe it's not just necessarily. And Roberto, I'll pose this question to you as a producer. Do you find that when you're selecting wine, when you're selecting botanicals, every year or every time you do it, it's a task that needs to be addressed the exact same way so that you have consistency over time?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was listening to Claire, and I think that sometimes we are also in a way parallel of a bartender, because often you may see vermouth like a cocktail itself. It's all about balancing non-stop. It's true, you have a recipe like Cinzano, Cocchi, all these names. They are 100 and more years, so the recipe is consistent. But believe in me, wine change every holy year. Sometimes you have the rain, so you have a lack of sunshine, less sugar, what else? But even botanical, any time we get bags of wormwood better than cinnamon or what else, we need to retest it. So we do a small test to see if it is consistent compared to the other years, and they all together need to be consistent. So what we do is a non-stop action of balancing every year, every season, the product, because of course we need to be consistent to the final consumer, to the bartender. If one year my vermouth taste of wormwood too much, or because the maize is very aromatic and it's overwhelming, it doesn't taste anymore of vermouth, it tastes of maize. So you are right. One of the exercise, and it's my brother to do it, we have to check everything. And again, in one of the old recipes, sometimes you have like 30 different ingredients. So it's quite interesting. But also for Claire, I mean, because it's already almost a cocktail, it's easy to welcome one more botanical, one more herbs, one more flowers, because yeah, you if you add some rosemary to it, actually you do what we do, what we also do, but you rebalance on another level. So it's easier to add a botanical to something like an aromatized wine than sometimes to a spirit or what else, because it's already welcoming. It's a natural nest of botanicals, and you add one, maybe a drop, maybe an infusion. You do it, but you bring it to your favorite direction or what you need to rebalance the cocktail. So yes, the answer is yes. We need to do it not only in the wine but also in the botanicals. That's something we know.
And I think to Claire's point, tasting is important. And if you do have access to that bottle, if you can taste it, retaste it, take the notes again. I think you mentioned the tasting in wine, and I came from a wine background. I started in wine, and the idea is always about where things come from, because you're not really making anything. You're curating other people's work, and so the tasting is the most important part, so that you understand. Sometimes there's a consistency or maybe a house style. I think the best example would be sparkling wine, because you might have like a vintage or whatever, but then you have a tete de cuvee this is their consistent thing every year. And obviously, Roberto, as a sparkling wine producer, I'm sure also is familiar with this, and it's something that you, as the person that's serving the beverage, you need to have that understanding. And I think also Bar 5 Day was a great example for me of how very few bartenders have the practice of blind tasting not only their fortified wines and the regular wines, but their spirits as well. And it's a practice that we should take across the board. Well, we are coming to an end here. I want to just leave it a couple extra minutes for each of you. If there's anything you want to say, anything you want to talk about, if you want to tell me what your favorite Negroni variation is and tell me why it's a Boulevardier, that's fine. And I'll leave it up to you guys.
Well, I'll say somebody texted me and asked me if I was drinking a 16-ounce glass of sweet vermouth. It's coffee, but I do like a little splash of vermouth in my iced coffee. My favorite, I like Old Pals.
Oh, okay.
Which are Negroni-ish. They're in the Negroni family.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's my favorite. And yeah, I'm also, if we're just talking about vermouth, my favorite cocktail that I've been trying to push on people is what we call the World Peace Cocktail, which is just a glass of sweet vermouth over ice with a twist, which is what Andy McDowell
what
drinks.
Roberto's drinking.
That's what Andy McDowell drinks in Groundhog Day, and they keep showing that scene over and over again. So, other than Negroni week, Groundhog's Day every year is my other big vermouth drinking holiday.
To world peace. Roberto, what about you?
Well, I am a Negronista, and with all the family of Negroni, Milano Torino, the Americano, the Sbagliato, I feel comfortable. Again, my culture in cocktail is not that deep. Of course, I'm exposed to any kind of cocktail all around the world, of course. But I feel home with the variation, maybe, but still in the orthodoxy. So. Maybe I like it to have a King Negroni adding Barolo Chinato, as we say, or in any way, I like and I am in the direction of the low ABV style. So Negroni is the highest of the alcohol I can get, and but of course I like the soda style aperitivo. So the Italian spritz made with, of course, the Americano, etc. So that very summer, that's very Italian, very fitting to my kind of style of life. But again, I am exposed and I see cocktail like opera d'arte. So I see it like any cocktail like a great cuisine masterpiece. And so I'm always curious. But what I really like is the orthodoxy of the Negroni, of course. That's it.
I love that. Roberto produces these little to-go Negroni packs that I really love. And they're just this perfect little thing that is like a vacuum sealed Negroni that they put in a package and sell.
Don't tell other way, then we have to ship it to United States.
Good luck. Good luck.
Don't tell. We have to. It's it. It's good because you. But the idea of this is that you always need to travel with a Negroni in your pocket. So this is it. So you open it and you pour it.
I love it. I knew he was gonna have one with him. I knew it.
Always travel with a Negroni. You can fly with it. You can bike, you can go in boats, anywhere. You just keep it in your pocket. So, but again, don't tell other way someone wants to buy it. It's too complicated.
and just so everybody's aware, it is made with Campari as well. So just
there's no Negroni without Campari, of course. By the
Thank you, my man. I was waiting.
No, I really believe it. I really believe it. But there's no Negroni without Vermouth di Torino also, don't forget.
I love it. Listen, you're speaking my language, my man. I will have I'm speaking with Brad Thomas Parsons in a bit, and I'm going to have a Spagliato with Vermouth di Torino and Campari. So don't worry, I'm fighting the good fight with you. So I'm just going to say thank you to you both so very much for coming on. It's always such a pleasure to speak with you. Claire, I miss you. I love you. I wish I could give you a hug right now. But I might be making a trip to New York soon. So if I do, I will be swinging by Hunky Dory. And Roberto, thank you for joining us. I'm so glad that you two got to meet because you're some of my favorite people. And if ever we're allowed back to Italy, I will be coming back to Torino very soon.
You're welcome. You all are welcome. Ciao.
Ciao. Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for joining. Thank you, Portland Cocktail Week and Distance Learning as always. Join us again in the future for some more spirited conversations. I'll talk to you soon. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Ciao.